you don't have that. And also they need fiscal space. And oftentimes this also changes. And so when you don't have consistency, when you don't have fiscal space, when you also don't have always focus on quality, so you have the MDGs, the SDGs, all the, development goals by various institutions, but then they focus on quantitative targets, and then the quality goes down, and then you go back to quality, but then you don't know how to measure consistently. So there's a problem of consistency as well, and then we can come back later to how, we can look at solutions.
One important question I do have for Okendo is, so Prof mentioned skills, you mentioned infrastructure deficits, and Professor also mentioned the eye population. I'm curious to know whether Okendo thinks skills deficiency or infrastructure, even the youth, do you think this is a problem or this is an opportunity to tap into? Or if it's a problem, how can we then improve on it? Because the idea is, okay, we found ourselves in this mess already, where the average birth rate, I think the last time I checked for Nigeria is, I think, 4. It's actually quite saddening. So which basically means that the growth rate is incredibly high if each family produces 4 kids. But of course, this is not the show about Nigeria. This is to understand how to solve African problems. Okay.
Oh gosh, well, thank you. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the kind invitation, Damilola. That was a wonderful, very generous introduction of yours. I wish you could tell my mother that when she tells me to take the trash out. Big shot, take the trash out. First, and thank all of you also for the kind invitation, Femi and the rest of the organizing team. I am a proud Harvard man, but I just know this university is so good that Harvard came here. So it is good to be here. And thank you all for the panelists. I suspected this as I was reading the bios of my fellow panelists, but after hearing them speak, I am absolutely convinced that I am the dumbest person on this panel. So I guess my only possible contribution to this discussion on the lessons from the economies of Asia is that I was so curious to understand the similarities that I actually moved to Taiwan in 2010 to understand what was happening in many of these economies. And all of these economies, whether it's Taiwan or South Korea, they all have a miracle on the river. And it's the story of the economic transformation of these countries. And one of the fascinating things that I observed while I was there, and actually I learned Chinese and I lived in that whole area for 1 year, was that they were clearly very deliberate about their development. They knew where they were. In the case of Taiwan, they understood at the beginning that they were very poor. But they said, well, we had the land, and so they started with agriculture. And then from agriculture, they moved into textiles. And they used the wealth of textiles to move into electronics for a long time. All the products were, before being from China, were from Taiwan. And then they moved that they've used that wealth to then continue to move further up the chain. And so it was clearly a very deliberate effort to go. It was based on strategy and analysis. And I do think that the most important lesson I took away from many of these parts of the world is strategy matters terribly. And when we look, and the beautiful thing about the time in which we're living in is this I think Rwanda demonstrates that we can do this far better than anybody else, right? Because Kagame has been working, busy, trying to understand, well, here I have a very small country. They've had internecine conflicts, and yet they've managed to turn this place around in a way that the healthcare system of Rwanda is now the envy of many of the region. And I think they've been very deliberate about learning from Singapore and many of the other countries. And I think, while I was talking to someone from Nigeria the other day, and he does a lot of business in Rwanda, and I was asking him, well, you spoke so highly of Rwanda. And I was like, well, there's nothing wrong with Rwanda. So I said, okay, tell me one bad thing about Rwanda. And so he thought about it long and hard, and he's like, gosh, well, the infrastructure is great, this is great. And he just said, the mileage program of the airline. That's the worst thing you can think about. And he said, but I'm pretty sure they're going to fix that too. So I really think that it might have taken us some time, but we've clearly learned a lesson. I think we are about to was part of the World Economic Forum, has something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution in the center. And what they're attempting to do, Professor Schwab, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum, is trying to understand the implications of all of these technologies, AI, drones. And so they gather a few countries, Japan and very advanced countries, to test, pilot the policies on how to regulate much of these technologies. And the idea is we'll have it in some countries, and then those countries will share those best practices with the rest of the world. Most of the countries are European countries, Asian countries, but there's one African country, and it's Rwanda. And Rwanda right now is developing policies around drug use, and because that's clearly the place where much of this is happening. So I think, again, it might have taken us a while. I'm not entirely sure what happened before. I just know that I think we probably could do this better than everybody else. And in turn, to your point about the talent, I think, the question is this huge knowledge curse or blessing? I think it's clearly a blessing right now, but if we're not careful, it will become a curse. Because ultimately, and I can tell everybody, the most important question across the continent for the next few years is where are the jobs? And those who are seen as answering that question directly will be seen as heroes, and those that are not will probably be in trouble. And the dynamics are the same across the continent as they are in Egypt. So I like to tell people, if we're not careful, the whole continent's going to go Egyptian on us, which is why we should. But I hope that helps.
Thank you very much for... Oh, sure. If I can ask you that, maybe quick to open up.
Yeah, no, oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to say that while I agree on the overall strategy, I don't think, sometimes we have the temptation of seeing, oh, look, there is this great top-down driven model that works great for Rwanda. I don't know how it would work in Nigeria. So it's 200 million people country, it's a federation, it's huge in size and in population, and even the structure of the economy is not the same. You have a lot of entrepreneurship. So maybe in the case of Nigeria, let's say, the policy should be that we provide some of the basic public goods and then we let the entrepreneurs thrive. And you know a lot more about that. So I think that the leapfrogging for us as Africans in terms of policy can also be, let's invent models that are tailored to the needs and the structure and the state of each type of economy.
I do have a lot of questions, especially picking up from yours to the professor, but I'm sure you probably will talk about it, and we're privileged to have you again in the afternoon for the keynote. I'm actually especially curious as to how Africa can actually circumvent some external factors that, apart from the internal crisis, but you want to develop an export-led sector, you want to develop your export sector, but you have these rules. These are things that I think about a lot. You have these WTO rules, then you also want to access foreign capitals, development aids, but you also have these rules from these multilateral financial institutions as well that you have to adhere to. But let's not focus too much on the problems. The idea is to look forward. The idea is to propose solutions. And I'm sure people here have questions. We have comments. This is funny. When the person who is supposed to help with the microphone wants to ask a question, then I have no choice but to give it to her first.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the speakers for your contributions. They were very enlightening. So my name is Nancy, and there's one factor that I feel none of the speakers touched on, and I'm going to address Professor Lulu because you sort of got the ball rolling. So my question is, as a Southern African, when you think the situation in Africa, when you think politics, when you think the public sector, it's almost synonymous with corruption. And I noticed that it was never actually mentioned specifically. We talked about governance issues were mentioned. So my question is, was it deliberate not to directly speak about corruption, or are we, do we overestimate the impact that it has on the economy? And is that just sort of, do we not understand? Because it's something that we see with our eyes and we think it's synonymous with. You can't talk about Africa without speaking about corruption and then moving from there.
We'll take this question and we'll take two other questions so that We'll take the one at the back, and then we'll take this lady in green, I think, as well. The man, then the lady in green, and then James at the front here.
My name is Natangwe. I'm from Namibia. I grew up in the time of the Namibian Revolution in the 1980s. At the time of independence, I was 14. The thing for me, for Africa to move forward, I'm a writer at the moment, and I'm also an innovator of trying to find a solution to shanty town like in Johannesburg, in my country. The lucky thing of me, I grew up all over Africa during the Namibian liberation against apartheid. I grew up in Zambia, Angola, Congo, Nigeria, and when I finished school, I studied navigation. I was at the maritime school. Then I traveled around the world again. But the thing that I came to find out, the solution for Africa is corruption and leadership. And without people paying attention to corruption and in the implementation of proper governance, Africa has a lot of potential. That is no doubt about that. But when resources of the government to improve education is never reached, the mass to educate people, the ministry, neither any of the ministry, non-functioning. The situation in Africa, in Namibia, is not different in Johannesburg. The situation in Johannesburg is not different from Somalia at all. For those who are suffering, it's the same. Everywhere in the continent is the same. And that's, I'm a writer, I have books that I